Welcome to Invest Well, Be Well, a podcast for wiser investing and stronger living. I'm Rusty Vanneman, longtime investment professional, and I'm joined each week by my co-host, Robin Murray.
Thanks, Rusty. I'm a storyteller and journalist, and I am so excited to explore the ideas, insights, and people shaping the intersection of performance and purpose.
This podcast is for thoughtful investors and driven professionals who want to grow in their portfolios and in their personal lives.
We'll talk long-term investing, behavioral finance, personal development, and what it takes to live and work with intention.
So let's get started. Let's invest well and be well together.
This podcast is brought to you by Main Management, LLC. Since 2002, Main has been recognized as an ETF strategist that combines an institutional process with the personalized service of a boutique firm. Well, our guest today is Jim Ware. He's author, thought leader, founder of Focus Consulting Group, and he had a lot of great wisdom to share. It was really a cool interview.
Well, this is a real treat for me because our guest today is someone I've admired for years, decades, in fact. I've read all of his books. And again, he's one of the most respected voices on leadership, on culture, and team performance in the asset management industry. Again, as you mentioned, he's the founder of Focus Consulting Group, and he spent the last 2 decades helping investment firms build high-performing cultures rooted in trust, accountability, and emotional intelligence. He talks about all that in the interview. Before that, he was a portfolio manager and analyst, so he is credible when he's talking to all these investment teams. And again, he is a prolific author, and titles like Investment Leadership, High-Performing Investment Teams, and Money, Meaning, and Markets. And they all dig deep into the human side of investment and decision-making. And in today's conversation, which was just a real treat again, we talk about what makes investment cultures thrive, how to lead with curiosity and creativity, and how to build strong, value-driven teams, especially in a hybrid or remote world.
Yeah, I mean, I thought what he said about curiosity, he talked about that a few times, and that was just so interesting. I mean, I think it's something you hear a lot from people in different fields, how to stay curious, and that kind of keeps you away from how he called it, going below the line, which is sort of where you're triggered and defensive and you're having an argument instead of a debate, and just keeping your mind open for possibilities. I think that's something to that holds true in so many different ways in life. So I really enjoyed what he had to say about that.
Well, the stuff that he said, again, he was sort of the ultimate guest for a podcast. Again, Wiser Investing and Stronger Living. And again, he's talking about how important wealth and health are. And the things he talked about, the practices he talked about, and he included like the 7 practices of good cultures, but really they all give us an edge. And not only professionally, but in our personal lives as well. So again, it was awesome to have Jim on the show.
Yeah, well, let's listen. All right, well, Jim, welcome to the show. Welcome to Invest Well, Be Well.
Thank you, Robin, and good to meet both of you, Rusty and Robin.
Yeah. Well, Jim, as I mentioned before we started recording, this is a real treat for me. I bought all your books, and I've been following your work for decades. And to keep this excitement rolling, our very first question is a tradition on our podcast, and that is we need a walk-up song to kind of set the tone for the interview. What is your walk-up song?
I would say, so I'm a Beatles fan, big Beatles fan, and one thing that I talk about unashamedly with teams is the rapport with one another is really important. So I guess All You Need Is Love would be a pretty good Beatles song. It was also there was a video on it saying it is the most typical Beatles song. It's the typical length, typical everybody's involved in it. It was written by the whole team, So All You Need Is Love would be a mantra for investing people behind the scenes, but it's important.
It's an outstanding choice. Love it.
Yeah, that's a great one. Right. Well, Jim, you have been a voice for leadership and culture in the investment industry for a really long time, as Rusty said, more than 2 decades at least. What experience shifted your focus toward the human side of investing?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before to you too, the first book I ever wrote was about personalities in the investment world. I've always been fascinated by people's personalities, Myers-Briggs, those kind of things. And I had a chance at Allstate Investments. That's my first boss was Gary Brinson at First Chicago, kind of a name in the industry, Gary Brinson, and that was a nice experience. But then I went to Allstate And I had a chance there to learn all kinds of different instruments for various reasons, like Myers-Briggs, like DISC, like the Enneagram. And I got more and more interested in the way people think. I was one of the first people to be interested in behavioral psychology, right? And again, Rusty, that's back when you were considered crazy if you were interested. I went to University of Chicago where they taught us that stuff's nonsense and that all markets are efficient and you shouldn't be thinking about trying to outperform because that's not going to happen. And yet behavioral psychologists said there's all kinds of biases that, affect us and make us invest poorly. And so I got fascinated by that. In 1996, there was a publication put out by the CFA Institute about how to manage the investment firm. And my original boss, Gary Brinson, had written a piece in that called Organizational Culture in the Investment Industry, right? And I read that and I was hooked. When I read that and saw, my first boss, really big guy in the industry, is also on the same wavelength of culture and how do you manage effectively. So I would say from 1996 on, I was really leaning towards how can I get into doing that? And it was pretty blue ocean in the sense of, red ocean is shark infested and blue ocean, there's nobody there. There really was nobody doing that in the investment world. It was all about smarts, all about IQ. The term EQ was not really known or used, emotional intelligence. And so many firms, as you know, Rusty, were really dysfunctional as far as how the people worked with one another. Mm-hmm. So I hung a shingle out in 2000, and the idea was I was going to work with leadership to build strong cultures in the investment world. And I had a pretty good job. I was a PM at Allstate, so I was running money, and that's kind of the big deal if you're in the investment world to be a PM and run money. I ran a couple $2 billion. But I've never looked back and said, darn, I really left a great situation. What I do now, I love. And fortunately, our clients tell us it's been very helpful and very useful to learn more about the people side of the business, how they operate, how they can get the most out of their people, really. So my personal goal was to help build investment organizations that are great places to work. Because I figure if you're working at a great place, you really enjoy it, and your energy's up, you're going to perform pretty darn well. So in a nutshell, that's how I got started in this strange world of people in the investment industry.
And you've written several books on the subject. Rusty has a stack of them over there on his desk. Which one do you say best captures your philosophy today, and what core message still resonates with you?
Yeah. Well, our publisher, Wiley, has come after us a few times to rework High-Performing Investment Teams, which was written in 2006. And every time I skim the book again, and I talk to my colleagues. There are 9 of us now at Focus Consulting Group. Started with my one shingle, and now there's 9 of us. And every time we say, the book stands the test of time. It doesn't need a rewrite. And so that book in particular is the one that we always recommend to clients. It was funny, I was at a conference once speaking, and we put one of those copies on the desk of everybody who was attending, and there's probably like 80 or 100 people or something. And one of the other speakers went around and started collecting them because he said, I don't want anyone else to read this book because this book really has some good stuff in it. So that was high praise that he thought it should be hidden from all the people at the conference. But basically in that book, we talk about 7 behaviors that we've seen with clients over time that really make a difference. And they are things like curiosity. And by the way, they're all skills. They're all learnable. It's not like you're born curious or not. You may show up in life as more curious for various reasons, but everybody can become curious. Everybody can get to that stage where they're saying, I wonder how this would work. I wonder about this. So that word wonder, I wonder about this. And the key to that is we say with teams, There's over and under the line. Over the line is when you are curious and open and receptive and you want feedback and your desire is to learn and get more knowledge about the subject. And under the line is when you slip into ego territory and the drama comes up and you start getting fearful that you're going to not get the promotion or that somebody else is going to make you look bad, or all those kind of predictable, dramatic scenarios that we see in corporate life. So we teach people what it means to be over the line, curious and open, and how to recognize it and how to stay there. It's funny, we worked with a team this week, 10 analysts and a PM, and that was a big element of what we talked about, because the best teams that we know, and then I can give you all kinds of research on this that we've done, the best teams we know operate over the line most of the time. Now, all of us as humans get triggered and we go under the line and we get fearful of certain things, but our goal is to catch ourselves. When we go under the line, we get fearful, we get triggered. And the way you know you're under the line is all of a sudden you feel you have to be right. You're in some kind of a debate about a stock. Are we going to buy this stock? Are we not going to buy this stock? And instead of looking at it in the open, curious way, like, I think it's a buy for the following reasons, but I'm open to your thoughts about why it's not a buy. Okay. Instead of there, now it's life or death. You are going to show the other guy that he is wrong. He is just wrong. And you are right and he is wrong. So now it turns into an argument, we call it. Instead of a good debate, we're all for debate, but it has to be respectful. Now you got an argument going. And it's what you see in politics these days, right? I mean, in the left and the right have a heck of a time trying to talk to one another. So we encourage, how do you have that respectful, curious conversation where new ideas come out? Everybody leaves the meeting feeling energized and like, wow, that was exciting. What a great conversation we just had. And to me, as a facilitator of those kind of conversations, when that really happens and you see people who are really engaged and energized, that's just a high for me. I just love it. I just love seeing people whose minds are really open to the possibilities. So that would be one thing, open and curious. The other side of that is candor. And most organizations ask us about that. Remember, there are 7 behaviors. I should probably just say them: curiosity, candor, accountability, appreciation, genius, decision rights. That became a really big one years ago. Firms kept asking us, we're really confused about how we make decisions. And so we added that one. And if you work on those behaviors, great things begin to happen. So the candor side of that is, how do I say something to you in a way that isn't threatening, that doesn't trigger you, that is respectful? And of course, a big piece of that is not using you in your sentence. Well, you, the minute you hear you, it's like you get defensive. Like, what do you mean me? But so we teach people to speak in first person. I believe this stock will really perform well for the following reasons. Not, you got it all wrong. You're not seeing things properly. Because that just triggers people. And it's so easy to just learn not to trigger people in the way you speak.
I totally understand that one person who got that book who did not want other people to get it, because culture is an edge. So I have managed teams and I've done due diligence on many, many investment organizations, and culture is one of those kind of leading indicators of performance moving forward. So I totally get it. So speaking of culture, in your words, and you may have answered this partly already, but what separates high-performing investment cultures from the rest? Are there consistent traits or behaviors that stand out? And I guess that list of 7 would be that list.
That's definitely part of it. But over the years, we've developed a diagnostic that we use. We used to call it a culture survey. Now we call it an organizational health survey, because it looks at more than just culture. It also looks at strategy. Do they have a good strategy in place? So it's broader than just culture. But over the years, we've developed this tool to look at culture, and there are several elements. First of all, does the organization have a clear and compelling purpose? And this is where investment leaders have really undersold the profession, because CFA did a study a while back, how many people really think their work's exciting? And like 80% said, oh, I love my work. It's really exciting. How many of you feel it's purposeful? And like 19% thought it was purposeful. And it's so silly because we say to firms, there are two big concerns in people's life, and that's health and wealth. If I'm sick, then that's mostly what I'm thinking about is how do I get well? If I'm really sick, like with cancer, that's a big deal. The other side of it is, do I have wealth? Can I afford to put my kids through school? Can I afford a place to live? And those two factors are so big. So the investment world is responsible for wealth. You've got doctors and whatnot who are responsible for health, but on the investment side, that's our bailiwick is wealth. And yet leaders don't sell that. But I can tell you, we do a lot of work with investment firms hiring people and bringing in talent, and they're losing the talent war these days to other industries like tech because people think it's just a boring, purposeless place to go to be in the middle of some investment firm, but it's not. It's so vital to the well-being of people is to help them with their finances, right? So on top of the how you get a good culture would be that headline, tell people about the purpose, that we're doing something that's useful. We're doing something that is constructive, that contributes to the world. And then under that, do you have a set of values and behaviors that are like the DNA of the organization that people are well versed in, they know what they are, they understand them, and they practice them. So part of our culture survey has a list of, it's like 75 values and behaviors that are common in the investment world. And we ask, which of these do you experience when you're at work? And you get 10 choices. And the common ones we find are client satisfaction, and you'd hope that would be there. Hard work. It's a pretty hard-working industry. Integrity. We've got to have integrity or we'll blow up. And excellence. Excellence is one of the values that's chosen continually out of all 75 for what characterizes your organization. Now, the key is then you look at the next same set of values, but over the other side, which of these do you think you need more of? Which one would you want to beef up? And that gets really interesting. We call those aspirational values, the ones that you would aspire to have more of. Firms that are really good, and I'm thinking I can mention them because, they've done well and then they've told us we can mention them, but like More, Mawer, up in Canada, we've been working with them for a long, long time, and they take this stuff really seriously. And if you look at their health organization culture survey, their current values and their aspirational values, so what we have and what we want, identical. It's like the person who wants to be really fit and they have the right, cholesterol and the right body fat, and then they can do their 2-mile run and all. They are really fit as an organization. So that's a big part of it. Years later, we kept getting the question from clients, this survey is really great and all, but it's pretty extensive. It can run like 100 pages because we get comments as well. Of course, now we get AI that can read through the comments, which is really interesting. But it's a big survey. Can you boil it down to what really leaders should be thinking about for a strong culture? Yes. And we just borrowed directly from Abraham Maslow with this hierarchy of needs, borrowed directly from there. And we say there are 4 levels that you got to be thinking about. The first is safety and security. People have to feel safe and like they're not going to be abused or treated poorly at work so that they can walk in and feel comfortable at work. If you get that down, it moves to, okay, but now I want to be part of something. I want to be part of a team. So this is the second level, connection and belonging. If you get that, then people say, but I want to grow and develop and get better and better. So you could have the first 2 and not the third. So that would be the third layer, would be development, growth, opportunities. And then the fourth level would be what I started with, was purpose. I could be doing the first 3, but it's an organization that doesn't do anything useful. And so I don't really care. But if you hit all four of those, safety, security, belonging, connection, we call it mastery and development, and then purpose and meaning, boom, you've got a culture that really attracts and retains top people.
I liked how you talked about investment teams that are fit in terms of culture, but sometimes they probably think they're fit, but there's still some common culture blind spots that you see. Again, especially among firms that you think actually have a strong culture. What are some of those blind spots?
Yeah, some of the blind spots we see in the culture survey, like they talk a good game about really being client focused, but they're not that client focused. And so one of the tools that we use that we find really helpful is we use voting clickers when we work with teams so they can vote anonymously. Because, if you do a hand raise, then everybody's worried about, how they're going to look depending on how they vote. But we use these clickers and we'll say to entire organizations, like 100 people say in the organization, which comes first in your mind? Like the owners of the firm or the employees of the firm or the clients of the firm or other factors. And oftentimes clients are not number one. And yet they've said, oh yeah, we're all about the client. So that's a gap. We look for those gaps, like you say, the blind spots, the gaps where the leaders think they're doing something, but it's not really represented in the culture. So Rusty, another tool we added that was really fun was we looked at what I call trade-offs in the industry. For example, every investment firm has to think about, do we want to grow and beef up our marketing and sales efforts and reward them really well so we get more and more assets under management? Or do we want to really have a great investment engine that can really produce alpha? Okay. And so we'll have a question on the survey that basically lays out that spectrum and says, where would you place your firm on the spectrum of we are really interested in being a first-rate investment organization, or we are really interested in sales and growth? And what we'll find is that it's all over the map. That leadership hasn't come out with a clear statement to say, this is what we're about. And it's fine to be balanced. That's not a bad answer to say we're about both. Some organizations are. But you take an organization like Vanguard, they're not trying to outperform the market with index funds. So they're just trying to grow. That's their thing. That's fine. We work with some family offices where they have 6 or 7 very wealthy families. They're not trying to get more families. They're just trying to do a really good job for those 6 or 7 families. So they have no interest in growth. They're totally interested in the investment side. So there are answers all along that spectrum of just investments or just growth and marketing, but it's blind spots for many organizations. And that's what I think is your question is so good, Rusty, because I think that's the key to this organizational health survey is it will reveal the blind spots. And it's so fun to debrief it with the senior team because if they're open and curious, as I talked about earlier, they get a lot of ahas out of the experience of looking at the data and saying, man, I thought everybody in this organization understood that we are whatever, and nobody seems to get it. Big blind spots. So it's really fun to uncover those and then help them in the months to come clean that up so that everybody does understand the same rule book, the same reality at the organization.
So we've talked about how important it is to have that strong culture and what we're looking for there, but how do you define and measure culture at a firm in a way that's practical and repeatable?
Yeah. And that is the reason why we really know that the investment world likes data and likes numbers and likes comparisons. So that's why we developed this organizational health survey, which was the culture survey. So we could put numbers to these things. And I mentioned the organization More a while back. They have taken the survey every couple of years. So they really do. It's like going to your doctor for a physical every year. What is my cholesterol, and all these other indicators of health. They've taken it every couple of years. And so they can measure and see that things have improved and stayed good. And that would be things like, are the values that you currently have aligned with the values that you want to have? Do those overlap? That would be a measurement we can show them. Is there a lot of sludge? Sludge is a term we came up with. CFA published actually a front page article that I wrote called "Do You Have Sludge in the Organization?" I became known as Dr. Sludge. Well, that was a good thing, but sludge is the behaviors you don't want to see in an organization, like blame, and gossip, and disrespect, and bureaucracy, bureaucratic behavior. Those are all the sludge values. So we measured that. And we found that if a firm had 30% sludge, they were probably going to go out of business. We saw that. We saw that, 35% sludge, and a year later, they were no longer around. So it was a pretty clear indicator of if you've got that much dysfunction in your organization, then you got to address it. Mm-hmm. And the way we address it is not to focus on the problem, because what we've found in our work is what you focus on grows. It gets bigger and bigger. So don't focus on the problem, focus on the solution. And the solution is your set of values that you have within the organization. So time and time again, we've said to firms, hey, you got a bunch of sludge. And we ask them, what do you think you need to do more of in order to lower that sludge? And the answer is always the same. Accountability. We need more accountability within this organization. Great. So then we developed a whole bunch of stuff around accountability and how to not make it about blame. So many people, CEOs would call us and say, we need to have accountability at our firm. And when we probed and asked them, well, what do you mean by that? It came down to, we need to find out who messed up and blame them faster. Well, that just creates more fear in the organization, so we don't ever want to create fearful organizations. We want to create organizations where accountability is thought of as, you said this earlier, Rusty, about hiring people. You have to be careful in hiring conscientious people who take pride in their work and they want to do well. So one of the partners at Focus Consulting Group, Liz Severance, she started off as my assistant like 18 years ago. And she always had an ownership mentality as if she was the owner of the firm and always behaved that way and has always been conscientious. And now she's a partner, full-blown partner. And thank goodness, because I'd be lost without her. So you want to hire people who are naturally conscientious and responsible. So you don't need to have a bunch of fear in the organization, scare them into saying, yeah, that was me who screwed up. We don't use that language. We just say everybody on the team leans in and says, here was my part in the solution that didn't work out. Here's what I could have done differently. And then the next person, here's what I could have done differently. And that is so nice to work. That's how Focus works, our firm. When we mess up on things, and when we mess up, there's just a good postmortem on where do we go wrong. And there's no blame. No one feels threatened like, oh God, this is going to land on my lap. No one feels that way. They feel like, yeah, what can I learn from this situation? The worst of it was I was supposed to go to Vietnam to do some work. I was in Manila, in the Philippines, and I got to the airport and I said, well, okay, checking in. And they said, where's your visa? So I opened my wallet, get my visa out. And they're like, no, sir, we mean a visa, not a credit card. And I didn't have one. We didn't. No one thought on the team that Jim's going to need a visa to get into Vietnam. So I didn't have one. And I got in a plane and came back home. So, but nobody got blamed or, taken to the woodshed for that. It was just, we learned we better be more careful when we do international stuff,
This episode of Invest Well, Be Well is brought to you by Main Management LLC, a pioneer in actively managed ETFs since 2002. Main Management starts with a clear fiduciary focus, delivering the transparency and personal attention you'd expect from a boutique firm. They provide financial advisors with solutions, not products. Main also believes investors should keep more of what they earn, emphasizing net of fee after-tax performance to help clients retain more of their returns. I've known Main Management for years. I've met thousands of managers over the course of my career, and one quality I really value: they invest alongside their clients. They eat their own cooking. Over 10% of the assets they manage are their own partner assets, and More than half of the firm are partners themselves. That says a lot. To learn more about Main's strategies, including buy right hedged equity, U.S. sector rotation, thematic innovation, and all asset models, please visit their website at mainmgt.com.
So I want to ask you about your concept of the red X, which is basically a high-performing person who, even though they have really great technical skills, is overall detrimental to the firm's culture and values. So how should leaders approach a situation where you have this red X individual on the team?
Yeah. And that brings me to one of my favorite little bumper stickers, which is position people for success. I tell this to leaders every week because they will have someone who may or may not be a red X, but they're just not working out on a given team. And they jumped into this victim villain kind of mindset of, oh God, now I got to fire Sally, I got to fire Sally. Instead of what I recommend, which is you care about Sally, she's a good person, so how do you position her for success? That's the conversation. How do I position Sally for success? She's not making it in this particular role, but I want her to make it in some role, so let's think about that. So the first thing about red X's is oftentimes they're just positioned poorly. So we were working with a firm in the South, and they had hired a guy from Manhattan who had been with a hedge fund, and he was just a bull in a china shop. Great guy, really fun to be around, but man, did he speak his mind, and he just let the F-bomb fly. And so he didn't fit really well with this nice, cordial group of Southerners. So they called us and said, can you help with this fella? And I mean, one possibility, and Rusty, you'll appreciate this, one possibility is to say, well, yeah, learn to work with him, because that would be an interesting experience, because he wasn't a bad guy. I mean, there's only been a handful of people in my 25 years that I would call really toxic, almost like evil people. They don't show up, but there are people who are very different. And this guy was just really the bull in the china shop. Well, they labeled him a red X, but again, I didn't see him so much as a red X in that he was a good guy. He just didn't fit at all with their culture. They asked him to leave, and he went back and joined a hedge fund back in Manhattan, did brilliantly. Just needed to be planted in the right soil, as it were. But red X's are tricky. I'll give you the beautiful example of, I was over in London doing a piece of work, and a woman CEO wrote to me and said, we've got 8 people on our senior team, and we definitely have some red X's on our senior team. Okay, so I flew over there. I used the clickers, so no one knew who was saying what. And I said to the team members, 8 of them, how many red X's are on this team? And everybody voted for at least one red X being around the table. And some people said there's like 3 red X's, all right? So everybody copped to the fact that this team had red X's on it. Well, the second question I asked was, are you one of the red X's? And nobody said they were a red X. It was 0. I'm not a red X. So, we don't see ourselves as the problem, right? We did eventually sort that one out, but it's a little tricky to get people to take a good look in the mirror and say, I'm hard to work with. Because that's basically the red X. It's somebody who's just hard to work with. They're kind of prickly, and like I say, they're usually not evil. They're, terrible people, but they're just hard to work with. They may have very strong personalities, and they often go below the line and get defensive and put up their dukes and are ready to fight. And if you really have one of those, then it is incumbent on the leader, if you want to build a strong culture, to deal with it. Because if you just let red X's run around the organization and, figuratively speaking, punch people, then the rest of the organization says, culture is BS. You say we're, a culture that is respectful. That's often picked one of those values in a culture that's respectful, which we endorse. We think that's important for people to be respectful, organizations to be respectful. And if you let somebody go around and be disrespectful all day long, you're basically saying, don't worry about culture. It doesn't matter. If you can bring in the numbers, if you can perform, then you're fine. And you can do anything you damn well please at this organization. And we've worked with leaders like that, where they just weren't willing. Gosh, I'm thinking of 3 examples that just popped to mind like that. where the leader just said, so-and-so, he's the best PM we got. We're not going to let him go, But that's the key. Then the rest of the that organization in particular in Manhattan was the most toxic organization we'd ever worked with. I was the last man standing there, but the rest of my team members said, I'm not working there. I feel sick when I leave the building after working with these people. And so I guess being a little less bright than the rest of the team said, well, I'll keep working with them. And we were getting paid a lot of money to work with them. But it became so toxic that they lost 30% of their analytical staff over the 2 years that we were with them. So like 1 out of every 3 people left, and some of them didn't have jobs. They just left. And they were good analysts. I mean, they were sharp people, but they just couldn't stand the stress and the toxicity of this place. So that PM was definitely a red X. Smart guy, very smart guy. And again, not a bad human being, but just so driven. He had an expression he used. He said, the investment world is a brutal industry. That was his word, brutal. And he basically thought that means I can treat people brutally because it's a brutal industry. Well, okay, that was pretty much the culture they had. And if you were willing to, and of course they paid top dollar to get people in the door. And if you were willing to live with that, you got paid big money. And they had pretty good track record, interestingly, because that PM was really smart, but it was a brutal place to work. So they chose to stay with the red X and live with it.
Yeah. Jim, I want to go back to something you talked about earlier, and that was the topic of curiosity and how it's essential to great investing. So how can firms encourage and sustain curiosity and creativity, especially in high pressure environments? Any tools or techniques you recommend?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question, Rusty. And I'm always curious myself why more firms aren't interested in creativity. Because to me, if you're an active manager, you're not going to win in the markets unless you're creative. Because you have to be thinking and doing things that other firms aren't doing. If you're just part of the pack, part of the herd, you're not going to outperform. You're not going to create alpha by doing what everybody else does. So creativity, I got very interested in creativity at one point in my career, and I have all kinds of books on my shelf over there about creativity, and I've written about it. Creativity only happens when there is curiosity and when you're operating over the line in that frame of mind where you're open and receptive and you can hear different opinions and you've got that nice, quiet subtlety to the way you think where nuances are heard and worked with. And you're not just head down, mush dog mush. That's not going to be a creative environment. Thinking of one example, a firm we worked out in California where the CIO was really bright and yet he didn't think he was being that creative. And I said to him, do you have a block of time every day where you close your door, you put the gone fishing sign out, and you just get to do your creative thinking about the markets? And he said, no. I said, why don't you try that? I mean, you're the CIO. You get to call the shots on how your time works. And long story short, he did that. It was great. He loved it. And he got curious and creative by giving himself that block of time where he was uninterrupted. There's a lot of things in our world now that get in the way of curiosity and creativity. I mean, everybody's looking at their smartphones all day long. And my view would be if you really want to get curious and creative, you'd put those down for a while and you'd allow yourself to have that deep think time. So, Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Slow and Thinking Fast, Nobel Prize winner for thinking about that there's a fast way of thinking. That's like traders. I think of traders. They're thinking fast. They're hearing the bids, they're hearing the, hitting the bids and stuff. And that's what they're supposed to do. If you're a PM or an analyst, you have to develop that slow think where you sink into a subject and you read. Again, I've been a meditator my whole life. And I think I tell this to individuals, and some of them pick up on it. And for many, it just falls on deaf ears. They think it's great. They've read about it. They know it has a lot of benefits, but they don't do it. because they're mush dog mush, and thinking that meditation gets your mind in a nice quiet state where it actually, new thoughts can bubble up. Whereas if you're just mush dog mush, the new thoughts don't really bubble up. You're on task, you try to get the work done. So back to your question about curiosity, I would say practices like whatever slows your mind down, whether it's yoga or taking a walk or listening to music or, in my case, meditation. There's a lot of stuff out now on breath work, breathing. We always recommend what the Navy SEALs do, which is the four square, where they take breath in for 4 count, hold it for 4, breathe out for 4, stay with that for 4, and then take their next breath. So they call it, box breathing, the 4x4. And that's just shown to change the blood chemistry in your body. I mean, it just helps you calm down. So I don't know of anyone who gets a lot of great creative ideas by being continually active and sort of racing around. So it requires the discipline of finding something that slows you down. And then curiosity is something you can watch you start to do some self-awareness around what does it feel like to be open and curious and responsive, and you can hear thoughts, versus that feeling that we all get when we want to be right about something and we dig in and we double down on our position. And those are two different feeling states. The one is kind of peaceful and open, and the other's I'm going to dig in and show that you're wrong. It's like anybody who has a significant other knows what that one feels like. It takes me forever to convince my wife that she's wrong. But that feeling of being open and receptive is a feeling state that you can watch for and begin to develop it and see if you can encourage it more and more. And when you do get triggered by something, the measurement I use for are you progressing on this curiosity journey is how long does it take you when you get triggered and you go under the line and you get all defensive, how long does it take you to get back over the line? So if somebody cuts in front of you in traffic and it pisses you off and you go, damn it, and you give them the salute, how long until you get back over the line and you're feeling calm again? And it's like, let it go. Who cares? Let it go. How long is that? That's the measurement. Some people, they go under the line and they like build condos down there. They're there for months. So that would be my thinking on curiosity and asking yourself questions like, curious, why did I respond that way? Or why does that irritate me? Or why am I against that position the person's holding? So you're just continually asking yourself thoughtful, open questions.
So I want to ask you back on the subject of culture for a minute. When we're talking about teams now where a lot of people are remote or working in different places, what are some of the best ways that you've found that you can really build and sustain that culture across those teams?
Yeah. And that, I would say that's one of the big issues we deal with now. Like if you were to list like 3 big issues that we get asked about, not quite as much now as during the pandemic, but we were lucky in that we got a head start on that question because we've always been what we call a results-only work environment, a row environment, that focus, meaning we don't track each other's movements or, I never asked Liz or Keith or any of my partners, like, well, what did you do all day? Because we don't even now have an office. We had one and nobody ever used it, so we stopped paying rent. We work individually and remotely, so we were ready for the pandemic when everybody all of a sudden wasn't meeting face to face, because we'd been doing that for years. And we had a client, and I can mention them because they're really good. They're down in Florida, named Polen, Polen. And they had shifted to a results-only work environment before the pandemic and had been struggling to make it work, but got it to where it really did work. And there were some interesting aspects of that. For example, when the investment team went to ROW, results-only work environment, they still showed up nearly every day. Why? Because they like working with each other. So it wasn't like, good, now I can stay home and watch Oprah reruns. that wasn't it at all. They wanted to be together, but there wasn't pressure. And so there were new rules. Talk about culture. There were new rules, like meetings are voluntary. No one has to go to a meeting. So you better sell your meeting to make it interesting so people go home and show up. But Poland really got the hang of this. And so before the pandemic, they were already in a results-only work environment. And the big thing you need to do with a results-only work environment is you need to really nail down accountability. You need to be very clear about who's going to do what by when. That's kind of a mantra we have. Who's going to do what by when, so that all of your assignments, even though you're not face-to-face and you're not seeing each other every day, everybody has a clear sense of what needs to be accomplished, who's on it, who's helping with that assignment. And Poland got really good at that. They got really good at very clear accountability for all the assignments and the tasks, and they were able to do remote work really well. Some of the simple things that we've advised people is to over-communicate. So if you really are not seeing people on a regular basis, and as we've talked about before, Rusty, so many people in this industry are introverted leaders, and the pandemic was hard on them because they had to force themselves to get on Zooms and talk to a lot of people because they weren't seeing them in the office. So they had to make that effort. They had to stretch into, I'm going to be more extroverted and reach out and touch people. Some of them weren't doing it, and we really had to coach them into doing more of that. So over communication and hybrid work environment is tough. I mean, we know firms where they've slapped 5 days back on people and said, I'm sorry, but you're just going to have to come in 5 days. We've decided that. And they've had very talented people leave as a result of that. So it has not been an easy one to negotiate. I don't know if that really answers your question. We still wrestle with how to best deal with hybrid.
Yeah. Well, I've over the last 20 years, I've had multiple experiences managing teams at remote environments. And I do think a key ingredient for success is that the experienced people have to buy into the philosophy and the process. And then I also think there has to be a commitment that people are engaged with other people on the team. Now, that all said, I still think one of the trickier things about a remote or hybrid work environment is mentoring and developing younger professionals.
Yes.
Lights on that.
Yeah, and of course that immediately raises for me the issue of trust, Rusty, and the trust levels have to be high when you're doing hybrids, and you have to watch the sort of mental chatter, like, well, I'll bet you so and so is just home watching movies. They're not doing work. You know, that can start to come up as an issue. So there really need to be high levels of trust and respect for a hybrid to work. And like you said, that people need to buy into it, and the rules need to be laid out pretty carefully. As far as mentoring and developing, that is one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we've seen with investment teams, because the investment world is often very much like craftsmanship with apprentices, and you kind of hang out with the lead PM who's really good, and you see how they work, and you see how they think about investing, and you kind of shadow them as a younger person learning the craft. And if you don't get to do that, you're at a loss, because how are you going to learn the craft and get better and better at it? So we are loath to say to teams, oh yeah, go completely row and results only work environment, and it doesn't matter if you see the new people or not. We would never say that. There have to be some rules in place to see those younger people who are developing, and to work with them and to let them shadow the good people so they can really look and learn, watch them do their work.
Yeah.
So what do you think your own personal habits, if we can talk about that you really lean on that help you stay grounded? You've talked about meditation is a really important part of what you do, but what else do you do to stay grounded, self-aware, and high-performing in your life and in your work?
Yeah, I love that question. So first and foremost, I've always meditated, and I do that morning and evening without fail. And for me, that that simply means I learned transcendental meditation when I was like 20 years old at Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, years ago, and it was the TM movement. And it's not a bad practice. It actually works. So I will sit down and I have a mantra and I just repeat the mantra. And lo and behold, it just helps me really sink into a very deep state of relaxation. Now, I've augmented that with some tools. There's a wonderful tool called the Holosync, HOLOSYNC, Holosync. And this is invented by some guy who did brain research, and you have to put on headphones or AirPods to do it. But it sends different signals into your right and left ear, and they're tones, and they're not quite the same tone, and your brain doesn't like that, so it works to make them the same tone. And somehow doing that gets the left and right hemispheres linked up. So now they're sort of working together and they're, where they should be or whatever. I don't understand all the mechanics, but I do know that when I do it, which I have done for years, the first time I did that, I think I was drooling after 30 minutes. I mean, I was so peaceful. I just was in a stupor. I was so peaceful. And again, the benefit of all this is to give your body that deep relaxation that you get, say, with a massage. I mean, I'm a fan of massage as well, to help you really relax. I've done a therapy. I'm not a big fan these days of psychotherapy for various reasons, but I think it's helpful, therapy and coaching, to help a person see kind of how their own internal belief systems are working. That to me is the key, is what belief systems, often unconscious, are like holding you back or keeping you from, I mean, some people, it's as simple as, I'm not supposed to be a big deal. I was taught when I was little to not be a big deal, to hide my light under a bushel and to not make trouble. And so I'm not going to really live into what we call genius. That's another one of our factors, the 7 behaviors. Genius being, what are you naturally good at? What were you like put on the earth to do? And I just believe with all the work we've done with clients that finding your genius is huge. And I sort of found mine when I stepped away from running money, which was fun and I was okay at it, to then running this organization, which deals with people and how they work together and all that. That was like, I mean, I joke about, I get paid well for doing this work, but I would do it for nothing. It's just so interesting and satisfying to me. It's my genius, okay? And so being in one's genius is one of the best ways to not burn out, one of the best ways to feel good about life in general, that you get to do what you want to do every day. And we measure that with people, and we say 80% is a good number to shoot for. So on average, in a week or a month, you'd be doing what is in your genius, what you really feel energized and excited by, about 80% of the time. And then 20% of the time, you're going to have to file papers and respond to emails and stuff. But find what you love to do and do it. And I'll tell you, that is a very fun coaching. I do a lot of coaching. Very fun coaching assignment when someone wants to find that and live into their genius, and we succeed at it, and they just light up. I mean, the energy, it's as simple as energy. Their energy goes way up when they're doing what they love to do. So that's a way to stay healthy and happy right there. I try to eat well and, not drink a lot and not do recreational drugs and whatnot, so that, for what that meant. I just get a lot of sleep every night. I sleep 8 or 9 hours a night.
Yeah, those are all awesome tips. I have another question. So changing gears a little bit. So earlier you mentioned Poland, which is a great firm. So you've worked with many of the industry's best firms.
Yeah.
Looking ahead, what gives you the most optimism about the future of investment leadership and culture?
In a strange way, what makes me optimistic is that the challenge and the difficulty of winning in the markets today, it's a little like when someone who was alcoholic and they hit bottom, and then 10 years later they say it was the best thing that ever happened was I hit bottom, I joined AA, and I got my life together. It's kind of like the industry may be hitting bottom and that this is a really tough environment. And we see that. And I think out of that, it means you have to get your act together. Whereas when I started in dentistry, like in the 80s, you didn't have to outperform, and you could be totally dysfunctional and keep your job. There's a guy that I name. I won't name him here because this will be public, but let's call him Joe. And he was a very average PM, never outperformed, often way underperformed, to the point that the leaders of the organization put like a 1% tracking error on his portfolio so that he couldn't screw up too badly, right? He never lost his job, and he retired with a wonderful pension and all that. That's not the case anymore. Now it's really tough. You have to be really good. So the firm we were with this week, they're already winning. They're doing very well, but they called us in to do a review of their investment team, 10 guys. It happens to be all guys. That's unfortunate, but that's the case. And they asked us to, inventory, like, what do we got here? Is our process good? Have we got the right people in the right seats? And like I said, they're already doing okay, but they need to really raise their game. And a lot of what we talked about for the 2 days we were with them was emotional intelligence. They're all smart. I mean, that. These guys are super smart. But do they have the ability to work together and be candid with one another and maintain their curiosity and all those sorts of things so they can perform at a really high level? And I think you'll see firms that recognize we've got to get better at that stuff, because that's the ticket to success. Warren Buffett said IQ, gets you into the game, and EQ puts you in the winner's circle. And they're going to have to get better at the stuff that we do, namely emotional intelligence, working together, building a strong culture, having good leadership, mentoring the young people, developing them, hiring accurately so you don't have a bunch of people who don't fit with your organization. You're going to have to do all that stuff right to win, because it is really hard. It's tough.
Well, Jim, you've given us a lot to think about. We appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Wonderful. Wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Before you go, tell us, how can our listeners stay in touch and learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, please do, because it's wonderful to meet both of you. Our website's pretty good. So Focus Consulting Group, if you just Google that, it'll bring up our website. And you have my personal information, so please do reach out. I am working on a white paper right now, which is 25 years in. It's sort of, what have I learned in 25 years, and what are the greatest hits as they were? So I'm working on that white paper now, and I'd be happy to share that with you and your listeners when it's written. But I think that'll have like 10 really important lessons for investment leaders.
Great.
Yeah.
That's cool. Definitely look out for that. So Jim, thank you so very much. It's been a real treat for me. You have clearly influenced me as a chief investment officer over the last 2 decades. And it's really like you're sort of the ultimate guest for Invest Well, Be Well. I mean, our tagline is wiser investing and stronger living. And you definitely hit points on that.
Oh, yeah.
Both professionally and personally, we're all sort of looking for an edge to do things a little bit better. And I think you've given us a lot of tips in those areas. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome. So welcome. Bye for now.
All right. Bye. Well, we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening to Invest Well, Be Well. Let us know what you think, and if you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe. This podcast is hosted by Rusty Vanneman and Robin Murray and produced by Garrett Crosby. Well, we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening to Invest Well, Be Well. And hey, if you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe.
If you have feedback, guest suggestions, or just want to connect, please visit my website, rustysbridge.com, or email me directly at rusty@rustysbridge.com. Until next time, invest well and be well.